Hey guys, Jimmy here with TRIARC Systems, and we're kicking off our Pushing Forward series, and we're taking it to another level. And so we're here with Will Petty to go through some things talking about mindset. We're going to talk about gear, and then he's going to give a couple drills for you guys to go through at home. So without further ado, Will, you just tell us a little bit about yourself and about Centrifuge and what it is you do.
Right on. Well, I started in law enforcement in 2003 out in Albuquerque. In 2011, I went over to work for the Critical National Infrastructure Authority, which was a counterterrorism academy. Came back to Texas, hopped on the department, started all over back on patrol. I've worked for 2 academies full-time, ended up being the lead firearms instructor for one of them. I've done ERT, been a firearms instructor, obviously, FTO, and and so now we're kind of transitioning into Centrifuge being the full-time role.
What separates Centrifuge from every other training organization out there?
Well, I think our data-based approach, which has really attracted a lot of major agencies, right? So right now we're on contract with the FBI. We provide VCB instructor for them, and they run that program in-house. ATF, RCMP, NYPD, U.S. Marshals, Michigan State Police, Oregon State Police, Texas DPS. So again, these aren't guys that have just come to the class 1s and 2s. These are agencies that have looked at the material, said, yes, this meets our criteria, it's data driven, it's vetted, the ballistics, the science, the human factors aspect of it all match the engagements that we're seeing, and this fulfills that need, right?
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Gotcha. So you're most known for your VCQB. And so I was just curious, like, what drove you to pursue that particular portion of training?
Yeah, I had a buddy actually die in a gunfight around a car. So for me, that was the catalyst that kind of started it all. And then when we look at the data, it's really driving us towards starting to problem solve that environment. And when I first started working on Vehicle CQB, there really wasn't anything out there addressing stateside law enforcement engagements around vehicles.
Gotcha. So you use a lot of data in developing your training. So why is data so important? I see, like, on Instagram, you're always posting data, you know, in between, you're at the airport, you're going through data,
right.
and it's like, it's a big part of what you do. So, but why for you is it so important when it doesn't seem like that for maybe everybody else?
So in law enforcement, when we start to create material, data is everything. If we're only using our personal experience, then we're literally selling a sample size of 1. We're notorious in law enforcement for creating lesson plans and then searching for said statistics or videos that support our hypothesis. So the goal is to collect the largest data sample we possibly can that's current. From that, we start to extract trends, failures, percentiles. We examine those, we create drills to address that, and then we further break that down into skills, right? But encompassing all of that, the student has to have a cognitive understanding as to why we're doing what we're doing, right? So we're not just creating drills to address certain trends, but we're giving them a cognitive understanding of principles and concepts, right? So if we just make somebody that's good at shooting drills, then the drill needs to be set up like that in real life, right? The goal is to create somebody who's thinking behind the gun and to realize that not every problem is obviously a gun problem.
Yeah. So you put guys in a lot of situations where they're having to problem solve in real time.
Correct.
Yeah. And do you think that's, like, for the average shooter, for the average guy who's out there, whether, you know, he's government, you know, whether he's for your local PD, do you think that they're getting enough of that?
From being in it for 16 years, almost 17 years now, and having worked for the agencies and at the academy, I think that not. I think that we're really good at creating people that follow certain commands or follow a prescribed procedure, but not really good at problem solving or thinking behind the gun. Anyone can pull a trigger, right? Anyone can pick up a gun, pull a trigger, line the sights, pass a qual. It's the environment, realizing that, you know, muzzle orientation, working around other people, communicating, moving, shoot, no shoot, you know, light manipulation, all of that's where we start to see the average end user fall apart, right? And it's not because they're not trying, and it's certainly not because of lack of effort on their part. It's because they haven't been given the tools and they're not thinking or problem solving behind those tools for that particular environment. If that makes sense.
Yeah. On the last video shoot that I did with you, I learned a lot just being there, just listening to you and Brandon talk. And I just remember there was this point where you guys were setting up, cameras weren't on, you guys were just talking and kind of going through, and you mentioned some of the statistics behind getting a gun in the fight from a car, and,
right.
and that it's statistically faster to get a gun in a fight than it is to maybe get out or try to drive away. Can you just elaborate on some of that?
When we look at the data, right, we find that over 60% of all law enforcement engagements nationwide occur in or around a car. So guys out there have a higher propensity to get involved in a gunfight in or around a car than they do inside of a structure, open air, things like that. The problem is traditionally with law enforcement training is we don't show guys what that looks like, right? So we're like, hey, we'll show you how to work a room, show you how to work a house, but if you get into a gunfight around a car, we're not going to really show you what that looks like. When it happens, you're going to be great, right? And the reality is that guys are not doing well. Over 83% of all dudes dying while conducting self-initiated activity die in or around a car for law enforcement. Wow. And 37% of dudes are being ambushed while seated inside their car, right? So I'll hear a lot of guys say, man, you know, having guys shoot from inside the car out is fantasy band camp, but the reality is that when 37% of dudes are getting ambushed while seated inside the vehicle, that's a reality that we've got to show dudes what the, you know, how to work in that environment, right? When we look at those ambushes and that work from inside the car out, we notice that they're high intensity, they're short duration, and they're close distance, right? So unlike what we're seeing overseas, the stateside law enforcement ambushes for guys inside the vehicle are very close, 16 yards and in, and we're looking at that 5-second window, right? And every time a guy starts to prioritize getting out of the car versus getting a gun to the threat, it usually doesn't end up well for that person, both in live fire statistically and also when we start to look at the NLTA, right? So there's a lot that goes into breaking down, you know, the, hey, is it quicker to draw the gun and work the guy or get out of the vehicle? We've done quite a bit of research on that topic, and the data is definitely there, right? Now, the context is important, right? If somebody's shooting at me from 100 yards away, I'm not going to sit inside of a car and try to work that guy over from inside the car out with a handgun, right? So we're looking at very high intensity, very close distance, short duration engagements, ambush inside the car, right? So there's a lot of nuances that make that environment unique, and we don't want to do trying to figure that out for the first time when it's for all the marbles. It's like, hey, you go home and see your wife and kids, or you don't, based on how well you improv this, right? So improv is cool for jazz. Improv is cool for comedy. Improv is not so cool for gunfighting, especially in an environment that's very compressed like that.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So in short, what you're telling me is everybody needs to go sign up for your class today.
Correct.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so on social media, I know you've hinted at having a bad day at the office. You posted some photos of your kit and your gear and some of the evidence photos. But one of the things you always say is you never tell war stories. And so you don't have to tell the story, but more so, how did that day affect what you do now and training guys now so that when they have a bad day, they're able to make it home to their family?
So we have this thing that everything works until it doesn't, right? Everything works until it's opposed. And my first real opposition was a wake-up call to me, right? I almost died. And it's one of those things that you quickly realize, like, the department wasn't going to give you everything you needed to survive that encounter. And having worked at the academy, I mean, you realize that we're always fighting time, right? So I have a very limited amount of time to spend with guys, either in the academy or in service. And so we're trying to be very efficient with that, but there's no way that you can get everything from the department. That's when I really started seeking outside training. I really got into taking the PT stuff more serious, the ground fighting, the jits, and firearms, right? I mean, because before then, I, like many people, thought like, hey, I shoot well on a qual, like I'm good to go, right? But we have a saying, a gunfighter will always pass a qual. Those trained at qual may not survive the gunfight, right? So simply doing well on a qual does not translate over to being able to successfully neutralize threats or win an engagement, right? Yeah. And so, yeah, man, for me, that was a big wake-up call. I'm not into war stories. I'm into massive amounts of data, kind of like what we talked about. Why tell one story when we can tell thousands upon thousands and start to see very consistent trends? But I do think personal experience is important. For me, that definitely was, a turning point. And so ultimately, that incident led me on this path, right, for personal improvement, so I didn't die. Yeah. And then culminated in what we now have with Centrifuge training.
Awesome. So, having said that, you were in the department or worked in a department for 17 years, give or take.
Correct.
How did you balance, once you started Centrifuge, how did you balance being on the road training, working your beat or working your rotation, and still having time for you to train, to be your hands-on, train your medical, being trained with your gun. How did you balance all that? Like, how did you find time? Because I hear a lot of guys say, well, I just don't have time to get to the range, or I don't have time to do this, or time to do that. So for somebody like you who really doesn't have a lot of time, how did you find balance for all that?
Yeah, I ended up spending 210 days out of the year on the range, which is about the current schedule now. And you just make it, right? So you get up earlier, you stay up later. The time that you would normally spend watching movies on an airplane, you spend reading books or researching data. You work out when the kids are asleep, right? You make time, and time is precious. Time is one of those things that everyone has the same amount of. And if it is important, you will find a way to do it, right? There's no excuse if you're a first responder, right, or a good guy with a gun. There's no excuse for you to be out of shape. There's no excuse for you to not be able to hit the broadside of a barn. There's no excuse for you to not get training, right? And training doesn't necessarily just have to be gun training, like you said. Medical stuff is a widely neglected field within good guy with a gun kind of arena. So yeah, you just make time, right? I mean, it's one of those things that if you ask everybody in my life, like I'm was and still consumed with it, but that's part of running a business. Any small business owner knows, you don't run the business, the business runs you, right? So it's just a hustle.
I got you. So one of the things you mentioned that I don't think enough people hit on is I'm a big reader, so I like data too. If I have guys that come in that say, oh, I'm going to the academy or I'm going into the service, one of the books I recommend is on killing. But if you could elaborate more on, you said you read a lot. What are you reading right now? Like, what would you recommend for somebody to read? As far as, like, it doesn't have to be a specific book, but just type of literature.
I'm halfway through Building Shooters right now, which is a look at neuroscience and how it responds to, or how it correlates with firearms training, both dry fire and program implementation. So there's good stuff there, but it's not always just gun stuff, right? I mean, there's a lot on the sports psychology, sports science arena. I think that really parlays well into the martial side of using a firearm or being prepared for that. There's a couple of good books out there. Mike Sinclander's got a good one on building programs. There's an extensive reading list from Force Science. Recently went to their week-long class and trying to wade my way through all of that. And really, that's a look at the heuristics and the schemas and the motor programming that goes into how do I get somebody from A to B, right? So it really just depends on what you're trying to do, right? I mean, if you're looking to improve your defensive tactics stuff, if you're looking to improve your, personal health, if you're looking to improve for me right now, I'm really into how do we take what has already been discovered on the sports science aspect of it, or the motor programming aspect of it, all the stuff that's been done through force science and whatnot, and how do we apply that to either existing or revamping existing programs on the academy side, in-service side, things like that, right? So how does that work, right? Are we just doing drills to do drills, or are we moving that person along from A to B?
Yeah, gotcha. So for the guy who's maybe getting ready to go into the academy, maybe getting ready to go into service, is that an agency or a department? What would your recommendation for him be? If he comes to you and says, hey, I got 10 minutes of your time at an airport, give me whatever knowledge you can give me.
Well, first thing is, make sure that you're in shape, right? Because there's nothing worse than going through the academy and failing because you didn't hit your 1.5 mile time, your push-ups, or things like that. It would blow your mind to know the amount of people that are washed out of the academy, and I can't speak to the military side, but washed out of the academy simply because they didn't prepare physically, right? So there's nothing worse than going through the academy and being worried about your 1.5 mile run, or whatever the standard is, right? So there's that aspect of it. The next aspect is, stay humble, right? Stay hungry and stay humble. We have a lot of guys that come in and they have this sense of entitlement, or this very nonchalant aspect of like the academy is owed to them. But I mean, nothing is owed, right? I mean, I could be fired tomorrow, you could be fired tomorrow. Nothing is owed, right? So make sure that you're humble. Make sure that you ask the right questions. Don't be that guy, right? No one wants to, and everyone knows that guy, right? So make sure, and everyone will have that guy in their academy. Make sure that you're not that guy, right? Prepare yourself, right? Realize that, and when I say prepare yourself, that's not like watching Dirty Harry, right? I mean, that's cracking open a penal code book. That's actually getting on. I mean, with the amount of data that we have available to us on, on the internets, on the World Wide Webs, there's so many resources for study guides and whatnot. Why wait to get into the academy? You're going to need to know traffic law wherever you're getting enrolled at, right? You're going to need to know whatever your state's penal code is, right? Your criminal code. So I mean, like start becoming familiar with that, right? Another thing that we see, FTO'd for a long time, and we see this as a continued issue both in the academy and on the FTO side, is people that can't write, right? So if you can't form a paragraph, that's a problem, right? Because 99% of law enforcement, unfortunately, is not rolling gunfights, or fortunately, however you look at it. But a lot of it is the grind, right? A lot of it is taking the report and then the words and the events and what you saw, smelled, the orientation, everything, and then putting that into a written format that somebody can pick up and be like, yes, this makes sense, right? So we've seen a lot of guys either get washed out of the academy or out of FTO, or have a harder time than they needed in the training process because they simply couldn't write. And if that's something you struggle with, then I would really encourage you to get to a community college, take a semester of creative writing, right? Take a semester of, hey, how do I take words and make sentences to combine paragraphs to convey ideas, right? So that's something that a lot of guys could benefit from. Everyone thinks, oh yeah, I can write well, and then once you're writing page after page after page, we see a lot of run-on sentences, we see a lot of grammatical errors, we see a lot of incomplete thoughts, so non-sequential order. So that's it's not sexy, but that's what you need to be doing.
Yeah, I got you. So last question: what does pushing forward mean to you? So we have this, our mission statement at TRIARC Systems is pushing forward.
Right.
And so it's the idea to keep pushing forward in whatever your mission field is, and we want to provide the equipment for that. But for you, as somebody who's in the field, somebody who's training people that are in the field, what does pushing forward mean to you?
I think pushing forward is a mindset. For me, it's synonymous with evolve, right? And we look at that as kind of a two-pronged approach, right? Or really three-pronged approach. Evolving the equipment, right? And TRIARC has done an amazing job with evolving the 2011 platform, with evolving the carbines that they're cranking out are just, they're well thought out, they're well made, they're well constructed. The less time the guys have to spend dicking around with their kit, the more time they can spend training, right? Mm-hmm. So evolving the equipment aspect of it, evolving the training and the tactics aspect of it, right? We're not like, if you're still Groucho walking everywhere, like 1994 called, right? They want their tactics back, right? So evolving to say like, hey, what is the data saying we need to work on? Not just what I want to work on, but what is needed, right? So right now we're seeing a big gap in, vehicle-based training for law enforcement, even though a majority of our engagements occur around vehicles. So, evolving the training to meet what the trends are saying, why we're winning from where we're winning from, why we're losing from where we're losing from, etc. And then evolving the person, right? So, constantly improving your physical standards, constantly improving your ability to cognitively process behind the gun, your ability to solve various environments, whether it's a structure, whether it's low light, whether it's around cars, whether it's med work. So, pushing forward is that three-pronged approach, right? It's the person, it's the training, the ethos, like, hey, what am I doing to get from A to B? And then the gear to supplement that, the gear to support that. Because if the gear is not supporting that, it just makes it, you can get it done with shitty gear, right? I mean, we all have, but it just makes life a little more complicated than it needs to be, right?
Yeah, I got you. Awesome. So if people want to sign up for your training, where can they find you at?
Yep. They can find us at centrifugetraining.com.
Okay. And if they want to follow you on social media, get some more knowledge from you?
Yep. Yeah. We try to keep it light. We try to keep it informative. So we're on Facebook and Instagram as well.
And that's just at Centrifuge Training?
Yep. Awesome. Centrifuge Training.
Well, thank you for coming out with us today. Tune in next week. We got more with Will for training as well as gear.
Awesome. Thanks, brother.
Appreciate it, man.
Yep.